space is a place for us.
Real people with real issues.
Discussing real topics.
Black space.
A safe space for our community.
So to set the baseline for this community, for this discussion, let's begin with the definition of community. And again, like as I said earlier, I'm going to be framing this off of Dr. Claude Anderson's work. His definition of a community is the following. A community is a group of people who are able to get all of their quality of life needs met from within their community, to include education, employment, startup capital, entrepreneurship, food, housing, health, and on and on and on and on. So from there, with that baseline set, I'm going to open it up to the panelists, and let's begin with Rock Soldier, the DLC, and give us your take on community. What do you think about that definition? How does that definition strike you? Do you have a whole different idea of definition? Just start from wherever you feel relevant, brother.
No doubt. No, I have much love and respect for Dr. Claude Anderson. I don't think it would be prudent for me to push back on his definition of community. It's on point, right? I think my only concern with his definition and this is with all due respect to all of the things that he's done. The only thing that I would push back on is it sometimes is not really clear to me as someone who is African centered. As much as I can be, I look at the world through the lens of an African centered consciousness, and many times it's not really clear to me whether his perspectives and his point of view are coming from an African centered perspective. Sometimes it seems like he is speaking through a Eurocentric lens, but he's putting a black veneer on it, which people are accustomed to. Like, and it seems to it has become a thing where, because some of us are so eloquent and so charismatic about putting a blue and black veneer on European worldview, they don't have to differentiate or make a distinction between what's a European perspective and what's an African-centered perspective. But based on my experience and the organizations that I'm currently affiliated with, along with some of the organizations I've been affiliated with in the past, it may be slightly inappropriate to not differentiate, make a distinction between a European consciousness or worldview and an African-centered consciousness and worldview. And the reason I say that is because his definition of community, it matters. Is that coming from a European perspective with a black veneer on it, or is that coming from an African-centered perspective? Because the African-centered worldview may not be, as far as defining community, may not be as he's defined community. Having said all of that, the way that he's defining community, it makes sense, but it also leaves us longing for community. It creates a void. His definition creates a void, and it doesn't leave much room for optimism. It doesn't leave much room for it doesn't feel good. If we cleave to his definition, then we could end this call by saying, well, hell, none of us live in a black community. None of us live in a community. So then what are we doing? Are we treadmilling? Are we confusing activity with progress? And furthermore, what is the solution? How do we get to because his definition of community is really, it's not even the iceberg above the water, it's the iceberg below the water, it's below the surface. And that can be very disheartening for people who are longing for unity and community, and for people who are already in situations where they think that they're in a community. So those are some of the things that concern me about his definition.
Rock, wow. Well, I don't even know what to say to that, man. I mean, man, you dropped that. So we're gonna have to revisit several of those the angles that you brought up in that. Heavy. All right, Daniel, let's have yours, bro.
Man, wow.
Right,
I probably should
right.
have gone first. So, talking about the definition first and foremost, um, I like the definition, but like Rock said, and it's utmost respect for Dr. Claude Anderson, right? He's been calling a lot of the challenges out in our community for longer than some of us have even been in the game. But like he said, the definition is relatively incomplete. I think the best way to kind of really summarize it is if you take a look at pr- uh, traditional psychology's hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I feel like that definition of community really focuses on the bottom of the hierarchy, right? The safety, the food in your belly, the roof over your head. Like he's focusing on really what are the basic aspects of just being able to survive and feel safe in a space. And then I think what's really missing is talking about those higher level aspects of community, right? The villainy, the ability for us to really build a space that is uniquely our space, run by our voices and our own particular philosophies that are built and designed to really move us forward, right? And I don't think he necessarily speaks to that in a way qualitative, right? And I get it, right? Because Dr. Anderson is largely around the economics of building up what is our space. Um, Understanding that you can't build at the top of you don't start building the pyramid at the top of the pyramid. You start building the pyramid from the base. And you can't talk about helping each other and saving each other when so many of us are operating from of a perspective of lack, if you will.
Mm.
That being said, when we talk to the central question, and I thought about it, I've really been thinking about this a lot during the week. Um, we don't have a macro community. We have micro communities. We have cliques, if you will, right? There's some of us that move within a certain group of like-minded individuals, but it's not sustainable or scalable, right? You might have one generation that's able to do it, but those skills and that mentality largely doesn't get transferred to the next generation, and then it's not scalable to where you can go from 2 to 3% of the population to maybe 40, 50% of the population. And truth of the matter is, and we always think you need everybody to be on board to really shift the needle. And honestly, the tipping point for our communities is really right at about 20, 25% moving in one direction. Everybody else, can follow. But if you had about 20, 25% of us really moving, and we see that in broader society, right? It didn't take 50% of people to move this country in one direction. It really took about 13 to 15% to shift the entire angle of what this country was. And we're seeing that right now, right? So if we could just get 20, 25% of us on a with similar agendas to and that agenda being the uplifting of our community, we could see some things really move. So we're not there yet. And I don't believe we have community. We don't have macro communities. We currently have micro communities.
Dog, you had me at Maslow's hierarchy. First of all, I'm a therapist, so this is what I do. So you want to talk sweet to me, man, you start talking Maslow's, man. Hey, I'm a cheap date at that point.
Man, it's and honestly, in the time that we've been on a break for a while, man, I've been doing a lot of work within the youth space. I just got back from doing a training for some teachers, and we spent a lot of time talking about how, education, the broader system of education, is asking classroom teachers to account for all of the faults and shortcomings of broader society, right? So you're asking kids that are coming from trauma, lack, to come into the classroom and learn. And by the way, Huey Newton and the Black Panthers figured this out nearly 40 years ago,
Yes, they
that
did.
if you don't feed a kid and the kid doesn't feel safe before they even get to school, then how can you teach a kid, right? Once again,
Right.
start with the basics. If you have housing and food insecurity as a young person, then what good is stuff that you're learning for the next 20, 30 years of your life when tonight, when you go home, you're not going to have food on the table? So when I
Boom,
speak about these things, I always have to
boom.
go back to really, and we see it anytime there's an economic downturn, and we're seeing it right now. Crime goes up because people will do what they need to survive. And so we see that a lot of the issues in our community come from, there's the mindset aspect, and we're gonna get into that. I know that's your wheelhouse right there. But then the very real aspect of, if you don't have it and you got to go get it, it's a by any means kind of a
By any
mentality
means.
to that.
By any means. Yes, and as you were speaking, man, you laid it out perfectly. I love your structure and your thought here. There is a quote that I learned a couple years back. I was exposed to a couple years back at one of my presentations, and there was another co-presenter who stated the following, and it resonated so strongly. And when your presentation here brought it right back to full circle. The mind cannot both survive and improve at the
Mm,
same time.
Mm.
that's
Just
powerful.
think about that. If you as you were saying, I mean that's what Huey knew, right? When you're hungry, bro, you everything else is done because the mind shut off. And you hear a lot of pastors eloquently weave that concept in their sermons. Unfortunately, a lot of flowery, articulated talk is held around this concept. Everybody knows it, but then when it comes to applying it, all of a sudden everybody gets real stupid, right? And it just depends. Those in power, they understand this is not rocket science.
No.
But we're in a capitalistic environment, which is competition. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I going to really help you out? That's a question for everybody.
Black Space, a safe space for our community.